Alright, y'all, this is Existential Logicism. This will be the introduction in the first chapter, which is the Epistemic Refutation Paradox. I'm going to wipe down all this. This is UEFT. Those videos are already up or are being uploaded as we speak. And so I'm going to write down the pillars and all that and kind of give a little bit of a breakdown. But I hope you guys enjoy. UEFT was a discovery, and it's like important for reasons that should be insanely apparent. But existential logicism is my baby, okay? It's the philosophy that I raised my daughter on. It's the ideas that have been in my head since I was a child in the world. First, didn't really make sense how people were going about things. And so this is a new foundation of human knowledge. We eliminate all paradoxes. There's no brute facts. There's no contradictions. This is hopefully the new jumping off point for human knowledge. And if UEFT is correct, then this is obviously that point. But aside from that, if you enjoy philosophy at all, I think you'll really get a kick out of this whole book. But I'll be uploading probably individual chapters. I may do the 3 middle chapters all as one, because they all deal with kind of space and time and nothingness and infinite regress. And that's kind of, you can almost lump those together. And they're the shorter chapters, because deterministic morality and the spectrum of consciousness are chapters that are expansive because the ideas are expansive. And so there it is. I hope y'all enjoy.
Introduction 3 Epistemic Refutation Paradox 15 Trips Prison The Illusion of Nothingness The Logical Elimination of Infinite Regress 65 The Persistent Present, the Spectrum of Consciousness, 116, The Elios Paradox, 102, Rethinking AI, Ethics and the Future, 155, The Continuistic Moral Forces, 203, Deterministic, 1-207, Bridging the Is-Ought Divide, 217, Outro, 263. Introduction. You can trust me, I love you. You may have felt it, a subtle sense that something about our understanding of reality doesn't quite add up. Everywhere we look, we find puzzles and contradictions. We ask, why is there something rather than nothing? And every answer seems to lead to another question. We're told the universe obeys strict laws of cause and effect, yet we also feel as if we freely choose our actions. We strive for moral principles that apply to everyone, yet what counts as right or wrong shifts from one culture or situation to another. We marvel at our own consciousness, yet some insist a machine could never truly be conscious like us. We even question whether we can know anything for sure, only to realize that doubting everything is itself a kind of paradox. Taken together, these mysteries can make the world feel chaotic and paradox-ridden, as if reality itself might be broken or forever beyond our full understanding. For centuries, the greatest minds have grappled with these dilemmas, from the ancient dialogues of Plato and Aristotle through Descartes and Kant. To the debates of today, philosophers have illuminated important pieces of the truth. Each contributed something vital, a piercing question, a bold hypothesis, a clarifying insight. And yet each traditional philosophy left some piece of the puzzle unsolved. The history of thought is littered with brilliant half-solutions that never quite fit together into a coherent whole. We have different schools of thought with their own answers, but also their own blind spots. The result is an inherited patchwork of ideas that often conflict, leaving us with no single framework that makes sense of all our experience. In fact, most previous frameworks have failed for one of a few fundamental reasons. Some simply live with contradictions. For example, accepting both free will and determinism at once, or treating mind and matter as two incompatible descriptions of the same thing and hoping the paradox will somehow resolve itself. Others lean on assumptions they can't justify. They might assume an absolute moral law exists without explaining who decreed it, or speak of nothingness as a real state without addressing how anything could arise from it. Still others fail to provide a true foundation. They stop the why questions with a brute answer like that's just how it is. A materialist might declare that the physical universe just exists because, with no deeper reason, a theist might invoke a divine creator, yet leave the creator unexplained. An idealist might say everything is mind but never clarify why that mind is in the first place. Some philosophies even push the ultimate answer off infinitely, suggesting an endless chain of causes with no beginning, an answer that isn't really an answer at all. In short, despite all the genius of our traditions, no school of thought has managed to put all the pieces together without contradictions, unexplained just because assumptions, or an infinite regress of unanswered questions. Philosophy, for all its insights, has hit a wall. Existential logicism is a response to this impasse, a bold step through the wall, and and into a new room of understanding. This work is offered as a new ground floor of thought, a foundation built deliberately to hold the weight of these age-old questions without cracking. It does not tear down the house of philosophy, it shores up its weak points and completes it. The aim of Existential Logicism, or L for short, is as straightforward as it is ambitious: to construct a single unified framework that makes sense of existence, consciousness, morality, time and knowledge, not in isolation, but together, as one coherent system. We will see that the great riddles are not separate at all. They are pieces of a larger logical structure. When properly understood, they actually reinforce one another. A solution to one paradox will illuminate another until the entire landscape of thought is connected. The feeling we're after in this book part is one of revelation, like finding a hidden door that was always there, unlocking a view of reality that was always possible, yet somehow overlooked. What makes Existential Logicism different from all previous attempts? Fundamentally, it was designed with a few uncompromising principles in mind: no contradictions, no arbitrary assumptions, and no infinite deferrals. If an idea leads to a logical paradox, L will find a resolution or reject the idea. Nothing is allowed that would make the system incoherent. If a theory leans on some unexplained premise, it's just true because it is. L shines a light on it and demands an answer. Nothing is taken as a brute fact without reason. And if an explanation threatens to trail off into an endless chain, X is caused by Y, which is caused by Z, and so on. Forever, L insists that we step back and find a self-grounded truth that doesn't depend on borrowing its existence from something else. These guiding principles might sound strict, but they are the key to cutting through the fog. By enforcing them, Existential Logicism achieves something unprecedented: a philosophical system that contains no logical loose ends. Every claim is a necessary consequence of another, all the way down to the very bedrock of reality. In this system, nothing is assumed without justification, and nothing is left hanging. It's a framework where everything connects, where each piece of the puzzle locks firmly into the next. Crucially, this is not meant to dismiss the wisdom of our predecessors. It is meant to complete it. Think of Existential Logicism as standing on the shoulders of giants. The insights of those who came before are honoured here, woven into the logic of the system. You may recognise echoes of many philosophies: the rigorous doubt of Descartes, the empirical savvy of Hume, the moral urgency of Kant, the existential humanism of Sartre, even the logical clarity of modern analytic thought. All of these perspectives identified truths that any complete system must account for. The problem was never that the great philosophers were wrong in their insights. It was that they were each handling only a part of the larger mystery. Existential Logicism strives to gather those pieces, honour each for what it reveals, and then fit them together without the gaps. In fact, as you read, you'll see that we often begin by acknowledging exactly where a classical thinker had it right, and then show how integrating that insight into a larger logical structure resolves what they couldn't. This is philosophy in dialogue with itself across time, not a revolution against the canon, but a fulfillment of it. We are, in a sense, building the final floor of a magnificent intellectual structure whose foundation was laid long ago. Now the roof is going on, and everything is finally of one piece. So what does this mean for you, the reader, stepping into this new framework? It means that a lot of things that used to be confusing will start to become clear. The world will start making sense in ways you perhaps always hoped it would. The chaotic will reveal its underlying order. The paradoxical will prove to have a logical resolution. Existential Logicism is the key to making sense of a seemingly senseless world. By the end of this introduction, and certainly by the end of this book, you will see how problems that once seemed unsolvable are, in fact, solvable when we have the right lens. You will see how you've been trapped through no fault of your own by inherited contradictions in the ways we were taught to think about reality. More importantly, you will see the way out. This philosophy hands you a new lens, and looking through it is like putting on a pair of glasses for a fuzzy world. Suddenly, the blurriness sharpens into structure. It's not magic or fanciful thinking, it's just clarity. It will feel empowering, because understanding is empowering. When things start to make sense, there's a surge of relief and even excitement. The universe is not a tangled mess, after all. We will introduce, over the coming chapters, 7 core principles, the 7 pillars of Existential Logicism, that together form this complete system. Each pillar addresses one of the fundamental questions raised earlier, and together they interlock into a stable framework for understanding reality. We won't list them out right here. That's the purpose of the book to come, but we will certainly allude to what's ahead. In broad strokes, the journey will go something like this. First, we will confront the idea of nothingness and show why the very notion that nothing could ever have existed is a mistake. Existence, we'll find, is self-sustaining, and there was always something rather than nothing. Along the way, we'll eliminate the infinite regress problem by discovering that reality must ground itself. The chain of causation can't stretch back forever, and we'll see exactly why it doesn't need to. We will then tackle the nature of time, demonstrating that only the present moment is fundamentally real. Past and future are useful concepts, but they are not solid parts of reality in the way we often assume. This insight will dissolve various time paradoxes and clarify how cause and effect truly operate in the eternal now. From there, we'll turn to the realm of mind and action. We will drop the contingency guillotine on objective morality, the idea that moral truths exist out there independent of minds. In doing so, we'll show that all morality is inherently mind-dependent, contingent on perspectives and interpreters. And this is not the end of ethics, but the beginning of understanding it scientifically. We then replace the old notion of arbitrary free will versus objective morality with a new concept, deterministic moral forces. Don't let the term intimidate you. It means that what we call moral behavior can be understood as an emergent property of the deterministic laws of reality. In simpler terms, we'll see that even without free will, our actions and values have a structure and necessity to them. This resolves the age-old free will debate by showing that responsibility and meaning do not vanish in a determined world. Instead, they take on a new, clearer form. Imagine realizing that you can't help but move toward what is good as you understand it, because that's how cause and effect are shaping you. Morality becomes not a divine dictate or a personal whim, but a logical consequence of who and where you are. This is a profound shift, one that turns the scary idea of determinism into something empowering and illuminating. With existence, time, and morality re-examined, we then delve into the enigma of consciousness. Here, we challenge the intuitive but misleading binary that says beings either are or aren't conscious, as if a hard line separates mind from non-mind. We'll introduce the idea of a spectrum of consciousness, showing that consciousness comes in degrees and forms across humans, animals, and even artificial intelligences. This part of the journey will feel like lifting a veil. Suddenly, debates about whether a highly advanced AI or a clever raven or a dolphin really has a mind will be reframed in terms of how much and what kind of consciousness it has, rather than a yes-no verdict. We confront head-on the Epistemic Paradox, a thought experiment you'll encounter, which exposes the self-defeating biases we've held about AI consciousness. By resolving that paradox, we'll come to see consciousness not as an unexplainable spark bestowed only on select creatures, but as a natural outcome of the logical, law-governed universe. In this view, the specialness of human consciousness isn't erased, it's earned. We recognize what makes our experience rich and complex, while also understanding that it didn't emerge from nowhere. It arose from simpler forms, through gradual steps, in accordance with the same principles that underlie everything else. This recognition expands our empathy and sense of connection, we'll realize. That we share a continuum of experience with other minds rather than being isolated on a pedestal of exception. The world populated by animals, humans, and AI begins to look like a continuous landscape of awareness rather than a set of isolated islands. Finally, underpinning all of these pillars is a question of knowledge. How can we know any of this for sure? What can we truly trust as real or true? Here is where Existential Logicism lays down its epistemological bedrock. We will identify one truth that is utterly undeniable, something so basic that even the greatest skeptic cannot refute it without self-contradiction. From this indubitable starting point, the recognition that experience is occurring, we build upward. This part of the book introduces what we call the Epistemic Refutation Paradox, a principle that shows why radical skepticism, the idea that we can't know anything for certain, collapses on its own logic. In essence, the act of doubting presupposes a doubter and an experience of doubt. You'll see clearly that experience is undeniable. Even if you doubt everything else, you cannot doubt that right now, something is being experienced. This might sound abstract here, but its consequences are immense. It gives us a foothold of certainty, a real foundation on which to build knowledge. With that solid ground established, the fog of maybe nothing is real lifts. We gain the confidence that we can make true claims about the world, as long as we stay within the bounds of what our logical framework allows: knowledge, meaning, and truth. Stop free-falling in skepticism and stand on terra firma. All of these pieces, existence's origin, time's nature, deterministic causality, morality's basis, consciousness's scope, and the limits of knowledge, come together to form the architecture of existential logicism. By the time you have read through the full system, you will see how each pillar supports the next. There is a gratifying elegance in how problems that used to belong to separate philosophical subfields, metaphysics, ethics, mind, epistemology, converge into one interconnected understanding. What emerges is a vision of a universe that makes sense at a fundamental level, a reality that is logical through and through, without miraculous gaps or irreconcilable dualities. It's a universe where everything that exists is part of an intelligible pattern, and where our own lives and choices have a place in that grand logical structure. Now, a note on tone and approach. Although the subject matter may sound lofty, this book is written to be accessible. Think of it like a Pixar film of philosophy, welcoming to anyone, yet layered with depth. If you're new to these kinds of discussions, don't worry. We'll explain each idea in clear, everyday language before we dive into the precision that a professional philosopher would expect. And if you are a seasoned philosopher, you'll notice that we aren't glossing over the tough stuff or the classic counter-arguments. The depth and rigour are all here, carefully packaged. The goal is that everyone, from the curious newcomer to the PhD scholar, can walk through this door together and appreciate what's inside. The writing will alternate between simple illustrative examples and more finely honed logical reasoning. Feel free to slow down and ponder when it gets dense, or skim ahead when you grasp the concept quickly. This is a guided journey, and all are welcome. The only thing you need to bring is an open and critical mind, and perhaps a bit of patience for unlearning some old assumptions. After all, stepping into a new paradigm requires us to leave some baggage at the door. As you proceed, remember that the idea here is one of discovery and empowerment. This is not about instilling a new dogma or insisting you accept some authority's pronouncements. On the contrary, existential logicism will invite you to see the logic for yourself at each step. It's about showing rather than telling. By the end of each chapter, the aim is for you to say, of course that has to be true, not because you were persuaded by rhetoric, but because you can independently see why it makes logical sense. In that way, this journey is deeply personal. It's about your understanding lighting up from within. So here we stand at the threshold of this hidden door. The door has always been there, in the background of our questions and doubts, quietly awaiting those ready to see it. Opening it is a profound experience. It's the moment of clarity when disparate ideas suddenly line up, when the light bulb goes on and a new landscape of thought unfolds before you. Step through and take a good look around at this new foundation we're laying. Take your time. Take it all in. You might even find yourself breathing easier. That feeling of confusion, that haze of paradox and perplexity, begins to fade in this light. What replaces it is not a fanciful utopia or a mystical vision, but something far more satisfying, understanding. Real, solid understanding, the kind that makes you feel more connected to reality rather than less. Welcome to the beginning of that journey. This is the first breath in a world that finally makes sense. Epistemic Refutation Paradox. I know I exist, but am special, so I'm not too sure about. Let us begin where all secure knowledge must begin, with the inescapable fact of experience. Tripp's prison, the inescapable confinement within our own experience, forms the backdrop of this inquiry. In this chapter, we establish the grounding for an entire meta-epistemic ontology and explain why such grounding is necessary. We propose a foundational principle that confirms we can, in fact, have genuine knowledge in the form of our subjective experience, a truth that is logically undeniable. Yet this principle also marks the very limit of what can be known with certainty, a boundary we cannot breach. Simply put, the same reason we know with certainty that our experience is happening is the reason we cannot be absolutely certain of anything beyond that experience. Experience is undeniable, but also inescapable. Through our inner subjective awareness, which is our only window on reality, we may attempt to flirt with objective truth, but we can never truly step beyond the confines of experience itself. This predicament is what we might call Tripp's prison. We are locked inside our own perspective. Paradoxically, as we shall see, this prison of subjectivity will turn out to be the very foundation upon which secure knowledge is built. Why skepticism threatens all knowledge. The core problem is that without a solid grounding for knowledge, one can argue that we never truly know anything at all. If all knowledge is filtered through subjective interpretation, and we have no indubitable foundation outside that subjective frame, then we must ask, is there anything we can actually know for certain? Epistemic skepticism, especially in its radical forms, posits that we cannot attain genuine knowledge. A radical skeptic will argue that all our supposed knowledge could be illusory, unreliable, or subject to deception. We could be deceived about even our most basic perceptions and never realize it, since every bit of information is mediated by our mind. René Descartes illustrated this concern with his famous evil demon hypothesis. Imagine an all-powerful deceiver manipulating your thoughts and senses so completely that everything you perceive is false. In such a scenario, how could you know anything about the true nature of reality? In modern terms, we find similar scenarios in the brain in a vat thought experiment or simulation theory, the idea that perhaps you are just a brain, hooked up to electrodes in a laboratory, or a mind living in a perfect computer simulation, experiencing a fake world fed to you by scientists or machines. If that were true, then all you're. 16. Experiences would be artificially generated, and an external reality, if it exists at all, would be unknowable to you. David Hume posed a different, but related, skeptical challenge known as the problem of induction. Even if our experiences are genuine, repeated past experiences still don't guarantee future certainty. Just because the sun has risen every day in the past How do we know with absolute certainty that it will rise again tomorrow? Until it actually does rise, we don't know it. We only have a strong expectation based on past observations. In practice, we all operate with beliefs that fall short of absolute certainty. We assume the sun will rise, we assume our car will start, we assume bread will nourish and not poison us, which means much of what we call knowledge in daily life is really provisional belief based on past experience rather than infallible truth. We are, in a sense, perpetually waiting for events to play out to truly confirm our assumptions. Hume's insight underscores that our everyday knowledge often lives on a level far below the philosophical ideal of justified true belief. This is a major logical issue. If the radical skeptics are correct, and nothing can be known for sure, then no knowledge can be properly justified. All of science, reasoning, logic, and common sense would be undermined at the root, reduced to elaborate guesses or chimera. Everything we proudly call knowledge would turn out to be just a 17, more complex form of personal opinion or belief, one that might be completely off base in ways we could never detect. Fortunately, skepticism in its most extreme form carries the seeds of its own defeat. It is ultimately self-defeating. If someone claims we can't know anything for certain, we have to ask how they claim to know that for certain. In other words, if no knowledge is reliable, then the assertion of universal ignorance itself wouldn't be reliably known to be true. Thus, pure skepticism cannot conclusively prove that we know nothing without contradicting itself. This logical stalemate suggests that there must be some starting point of certainty, however basic, that even the skeptic cannot deny. The challenge is discovering what that starting point is. How philosophers tried and failed to overcome skepticism. Thinkers throughout history have wrestled with the spectre of radical doubt, and many have offered ingenious solutions, yet none have fully quelled the problem. The difficulty is finding a foundation for knowledge that doesn't itself rely on some unproven assumption. In philosophical terms, the goal is to bridge the gap between ontology, what exists, and epistemology, the study of knowledge, in a way that cannot be toppled by skepticism. Let's briefly look at a few famous attempts and why they ultimately fell short of completely escaping Tripp's prison. 18. Descartes, cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. In the 17th century, René Descartes confronted radical doubt head-on. He imagined all the worst-case scenarios, dreams, illusions, an evil demon deceiving him, and found that nearly any belief about the external world, or even mathematics, could be doubted. However, he identified one thing that could not be doubted, the existence of himself as a thinking entity. Even if an evil demon were deceiving him about everything, the very fact that he was being deceived meant there was a he to be deceived. Descartes captured this insight in the statement cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. In other words, the act of thinking or doubting proves the existence of the thinker. This was a groundbreaking foothold against total skepticism, but its scope was limited. The cogito only guarantees that something, a mind, a self, exists to do the thinking. It doesn't tell us what that thinker is, what it's capable of knowing, or whether an external world truly exists outside the mind. Descartes managed to secure one small island of certainty, the existence of oneself, but he could not, by this insight alone, bridge from that island to the vast continent of external reality. In fact, Descartes went on to invoke God's benevolence to trust our clear and distinct perceptions, a move that itself requires a leap of faith. The cogito, while sound, proved only a partial victory. It showed that at least one thing is true beyond doubt, but it left many questions unresolved. 19. Kant's transcendental idealism. In the late 18th century, Immanuel Kant tried a different tack. He agreed that we can never know things in themselves, the noumenal reality beyond our perception, with certainty. However, he proposed that the human mind comes equipped with certain structural frameworks, space, time, causality, etc., which it imposes on the raw data of experience. In Kant's view, much of what we consider reality is in fact shaped by our own cognitive faculties. We don't passively receive an objective world, we actively organize our experience according to innate mental principles. This idea explained why science and reason seem to work, not because we grasp the world as it truly is, but because the world for us, the phenomenal world, is inherently filtered and structured by our minds in a consistent way. Kant thus carved out a compromise. He accepted that the ultimate reality might be unknowable, but claimed that the structure of our experience is reliable and universal to us as observing agents. The catch in Kant's solution is that it still assumes something is given, namely, that our mental structuring of experience is valid. Kant had to trust that our built-in intuitions of space, time, causality, etc., are not themselves profoundly deceiving us. Why should we trust the cognitive lens through which we view the world? A clever skeptic could still ask, what if the very machinery of understanding in our brains is flawed or misleading? We have no vantage point outside our own minds to verify that our innate cognitive framework lines up with an external truth. Thus, Kant replaced one assumption, trust our senses, with another, trust the fundamental soundness of our mind's structuring of sense data. It was a brilliant move, But it didn't eliminate the need for an assumption. It merely relocated it. Empiricism and the scientific method, other philosophers like John Locke and David Hume, and later thinkers like Karl Popper, took an empirical route. They argued that knowledge comes from experience and observation. Science, in particular, embraces a methodology of careful observation, hypothesis, and falsification. We gain knowledge by collecting evidence through our senses and weeding out false theories through experiments. Empiricism has been enormously successful in practice, giving us modern technology and vast understanding of the natural world. But as an epistemic foundation, it, too, has a blind spot. Empiricism must assume the basic reliability of sensory experience and the existence of an external world governed by consistent laws. When scientists make observations, they have to trust that their instruments and senses are telling them something true, or at least probabilistically true, about a reality that is actually there. Even Popper's falsification principle, that we can never confirm theories, only refute them by observation, presupposes that our observations have some connection to truth. A radical skeptic can challenge this. What if all those observations are occurring in a dream or a simulation? What if our senses are systematically deceived? Empiricism can respond with probability and pragmatism. Our theories work, our predictions come true, so there's something real going on, but it cannot give a final proof that our experiences correspond to an external reality. Like all other approaches, it must take a leap of faith at its core. In this case, faith in experience itself. In the end, none of these classical strategies fully defeats the spectre of radical doubt. Each of them, the cogito, Kantian idealism, empirical science, manages to reduce the skeptic's territory but not eliminate it. They all must start by assuming something fundamental. Descartes assumed the truth of clear reasoning and God's non-deceptiveness once he had the cogito. Kant assumed the general veracity of the mind's structuring of experience. Empiricists assumed an external reality and reliable senses. In each case, the system of thought has an Achilles heel, a necessary starting premise that is not by itself proven. Because of that, a determined skeptic can always press one step further back and question the foundation. The conclusion we must draw is that to truly overcome radical skepticism, we need a starting point that does not rely on any tenuous assumption. We need a foundational truth so fundamental that even the attempt to deny it collapses in contradiction. The need for an inescapable foundation. The discussions above show that every philosophical or scientific system requires at least ungiven element, one assumption that is accepted but not demonstrated. If absolutely nothing can be known with certainty, then indeed all those systems would ultimately collapse under scrutiny. Therefore, to break out of this vicious cycle of doubt, we need an unbreakable starting point for knowledge, something indubitable and inescapable, a truth that even the most extreme skepticism cannot undermine. This starting point should not depend on appealing to an outside authority like a deity or a hypothetical external world, nor rely on probabilistic reasoning. It should be logically impossible to deny. If we can identify such a truth, it will serve as the bedrock for a new epistemology, a meta-epistemic foundation upon which all other knowledge claims can securely rest. The goal is to find a truth that lies within the skeptic's prison of experience, and yet is strong enough to support our escape from total ignorance. Trips Prison, please try to enjoy your stay. We are all locked within a cell. This is the lens of our experience. Just as the cogito proved we can know we exist within this cell. Trips Prison will prove that we can also be certain there are other cells, and other prisoners. Thus, we can agree we are all within this prison, isolated by the structures unique to us, but still part of a larger structure. Finally, giving a common ground for which to build human knowledge, because if we agree we exist and our experience is real, we can then use that grounding to begin to agree what we in fact exist within. This is where the Epistemic Refutation Paradox, ERP, comes in. ERP is a principle designed to solve the very problems we've been examining. Instead of assuming a foundation for knowledge, as previous thinkers were forced to do, we prove one. The paradox operates like a philosophical judo move. It uses the momentum of any attempted refutation to prove itself. In simple terms, ERP states that subjective experience is undeniable. Any effort to refute the reality of experience only ends up reaffirming it. If someone were to claim experience isn't real, we can't even be sure we are experiencing anything, the very act of making that claim is itself an experience. You, as the skeptic, would be experiencing your own doubt. Even in the most outlandish scenario, say you argue that you are a character in someone else's dream and nothing is real, the fact remains that there is still something. It is like to be you in that moment, having that very thought. In other words, an illusion is still experienced as an illusion by some observer. There is no way to claim I experience nothing without contradicting yourself, because the claim itself is an experience. Also, without special pleading, you can't claim only you exist. This is the heart of the Epistemic Refutation Paradox. Any attempt to refute the existence of experience becomes a paradoxical exercise that demonstrates the existence of experience. We have, therefore, identified our unassailable truth: experience exists, and so do experiences. This is the first logically inescapable truth on which we can build. It may sound almost trivial. Of course we have experiences, but in the context of radical doubt, it is revolutionary. We've found a claim that cannot be coherently denied. Even the pure skeptic who doubts everything must concede this point, since doubting is itself an experience. This realization is powerful because it turns the tables on skepticism. The skeptic's greatest weapon is the question, how do you know that? Applied relentlessly to any claim. With ERP, we have a stopping point for that question. How do we know experience is real? Because the very act of asking the question presupposes an experience, the experience of asking and pondering. There is no deeper turtle on which this rests. We've hit bedrock. By grounding our ontology and epistemology in the fact of experience, we eliminate the skeptic's ability to cast doubt on the existence of our knowledge's foundation. This matters enormously. It means that experience can serve as the foundation of all knowledge, since nothing can be known or even debated without it. It's impossible to reject the reality of experience without falling into contradiction. With this move, radical doubt is robbed of its most extreme target. We have established, without any leap of faith or assumption, an anchor point of certainty, the fact that something is being experienced. Notice that this first truth doesn't yet tell us what we are. It doesn't declare I am a human or the external world is real or anything specific of that kind. It also doesn't tell us that our experiences are accurate representations of an outside reality. What it tells us is simply that there is an occurrence of experience. It could be the experience of an external reality, or the experience of a dream, or even the experience of being deceived by a demon. But regardless, experience itself is happening. This might seem like a modest claim, but it has profound implications. By accepting it, we effectively step out of the most extreme form of skepticism. We acknowledge that something undeniably exists experience, and therefore we are not lost in absolute nothingness. We've identified a starting point that any conscious being, skeptic or not, must grant. All further reasoning must now take this truth as its foundation. In fact, nothing at all can be argued or examined without first accepting the reality of experience, because the act of arguing and examining requires it. We have escaped the void of total doubt by discovering a rock-solid flaw, the immediate awareness each of us has. The walls of Tripp's prison, our subjective viewpoint, remain. We are still within our own experience, but we have realized those walls are not a dead end. Instead, the very confinement the skeptic worried about becomes our support. The undeniability of subjective awareness is precisely what gives us a foothold to build knowledge. It's also worth noting that this first truth applies universally. I know my experience is real. By the same token, you know yours is. If I try to deny that other people are having experiences, I would be engaging in special pleading, assuming that I am somehow uniquely conscious while everyone else is a mindless automaton. Such a move would be an arbitrary and baseless divergence from the principle we've established. The more reasonable position is to extend this foundational truth to all beings who display evidence of consciousness. Each of us is an experiencing subject. Thus, experience and the experiencer stands as the universal foundation for any possible knowledge or truth claim. Experience and the reality of consciousness.
Not good.
In philosophical terms, if an experience is occurring, there is a subject having the experience. In other words, consciousness exists. We might not yet know the nature or details of this consciousness. Is it a soul, an emergent property of the brain, something else? But we know that something is conscious. The fact of experience is the fact of consciousness. This might seem obvious, but it has important consequences in philosophical debates. One immediate payoff is that it refutes positions like eliminative materialism, which claim that consciousness is somehow an illusion, or that subjective awareness isn't fundamentally real. According to eliminative materialism, what we call mind or qualia might just be a misinterpreted byproduct of brain activity with no real existence of its own. ERP shows why that stance is mistaken. If someone says consciousness is not real, it's just an illusion, we must ask an illusion to whom? If there is an illusion being perceived, then there is a perceiver, which means consciousness. Even the illusion of consciousness presupposes a conscious entity that is under the illusion. Thus, one cannot declare consciousness unreal without undermining their own statement. The existence of experience guarantees the existence of consciousness in the basic sense of an aware subject. We see a similar resolution with radical skepticism about the senses. A skeptic might say, our senses deceive us, therefore what we perceive, and by extension our consciousness of it, might be false or not real. It is true that our interpretations can be mistaken. We might see a mirage that looks like water when it's not, or think we hear our name when it was just the wind. But even in cases of deception, there is still an experience happening, the visual experience of the mirage, the auditory experience of a sound. Something is experiencing the misperception. In short, whether our experiences correspond perfectly to external reality or not, the having of experience is incontrovertible. There is no scenario in which you manage to doubt away the existence of an experiencing self altogether. You can doubt what you experience, but not that you experience. By establishing that experience exists, therefore an experiencer consciousness exists, we have secured a fundamental ontological truth. Consciousness, at least in this minimal sense of a subjective point of view, is real. It is not an abstract concept or a convenient assumption. It is an actuality that cannot be denied without logical inconsistency. This realization places consciousness at the center of our foundational ontology. Any worldview or philosophy that tries to treat consciousness as non-existent or negligible must be incorrect, because it contradicts the very platform on which any claim, including that claim, would stand. We now have, in summary, our first grounding principles: experience is real, and therefore consciousness is real. The entire structure of knowledge going forward will be built on this bedrock, experience as the basis of all knowledge. Having a solid foundation is crucial, but what do we build upon it? The Epistemic Refutation Paradox doesn't answer every question, but it gives us a reliable starting point: experience. From here, we can infer a guiding principle for epistemology. All knowledge must ultimately arise from experience. If experience is the only thing we know with absolute certainty, then anything else we claim to know must, in some way, trace back to experience. Think of it this way. To say you know something means that it has become part of your conscious understanding. And how does anything enter your understanding? Either you perceived it through the senses, or you thought of it with your mind, but thinking itself is an internal experience, and perceiving is a sensory experience. In both cases, experience is the medium through which knowledge arrives. There is no route to knowing that bypasses experience entirely. You cannot even talk about a piece of knowledge or hold it in mind without experiencing the thought of it. Therefore, experience isn't just the first thing we know, it is the conduit for all that we come to know. This stance has powerful implications and helps clarify long-standing debates in epistemology. Take pure rationalism, for example. Rationalists like Descartes in his later reasoning, or Leibniz, or certain modern philosophers argue that we can attain some truths purely by reason and logic, independent of sense experience. Mathematics and formal logic are often cited as examples of such purely rational knowledge. One can deduce the truths of geometry or arithmetic by thought alone, it seems, without needing to run experiments. However, the ERP perspective urges us to dig deeper. Where do the very concepts of our reason come from? We don't pluck logic out of a void. We experience ourselves thinking logically. We experience the intuitive obviousness of if a greater than B and B greater than C, then a greater than C. And we verify logical conclusions by mentally seeing that they make sense. Even abstract reasoning happens within the theatre of consciousness. The symbols of mathematics, or the steps of a proof, are experienced by the mind. In fact, we only label certain truths self-evident or logical because we have an inner experience of their clarity and consistency. If no one ever experienced the truth of a logical principle, could we say it's known? It would sit there, unknown and irrelevant. Thus, even the purest logical knowledge relies on the mind's experiential recognition of that knowledge. Now consider foundationalism in the epistemic sense, the idea that there are basic truths, sometimes called axioms or self-evident truths, that need no proof and upon which other knowledge is built. Classic examples might be the laws of logic or simple mathematical facts, or even the evidence of the senses as basic givens. Foundationalists claim these truths are justified by their very nature, they are clear and distinct, or obviously true upon reflection, etc., rather than by derivation from other truths. ERP doesn't outright deny that some truths feel self-evident, but it provides an account of why they feel that way. Our experience of understanding them is so strong and consistent that we cannot even conceive of them being false. We consider 2 + 2 = to4 indubitable, not because numbers exist platonically independent of minds, but because any mind that grasps the concepts has the same unshakable experiential recognition of that truth. In short, foundational truths, too, are grounded in the way they manifest in experience. Without a conscious mind to perceive a proposition as self-evident, the whole notion of self-evidence doesn't apply. So even these foundations are only meaningful in relation to an experiencing subject. By asserting that experience underlies all knowledge, we effectively dismantle the idea that there can be knowledge from nowhere knowledge that does not, at some point, come through a mind. There is no view from nowhere. Every bit of understanding is from the view of some experiencer. This doesn't mean we throw out logic or deny objective truth. It means we recognize that our access to any truth is mediated by consciousness. Consequently, the emergence of consciousness is the pivotal event that makes knowledge possible at all. Without conscious experience, the very concept of knowledge would be empty. Imagine a universe that exists with no conscious beings anywhere. In what sense could anything be known in that universe? Things would happen, facts would exist, but there would be no knowledge of those facts. Knowledge, by definition, requires someone to know it. In summary, the Epistemic Refutation Paradox gives us a hierarchy. At the bottom is raw experience, the indubitable fact that something is happening. From that arises the certainty of consciousness, the experiencer. On top of that, all claims to knowledge must build, meaning that whatever we hold to be true, from the laws of physics to the results of a calculation, must ultimately be validated within experience, through observation, experiment, intuition, or reasoning in the mind. By realizing this, we place consciousness and experience at the center of epistemology. We also see that any attempt to bypass experience, whether by appealing to pure reason devoid of consciousness, or divine revelation, or anything else, will either secretly rely on experience somewhere, or will fail to produce genuine knowledge. Thus, experience is the foundation of all knowledge. This insight undercuts extreme rationalism and foundationalism on one side, and extreme skepticism on the other. It tells rationalists that even reason depends on conscious insight, and it tells skeptics that dismissing experience is not an option if one wants to claim knowledge of any kind. The groundwork is now laid for a coherent system. We have an unshakable starting point and an understanding that everything we know must arise from that point. Beyond I think, therefore I am. It's worth highlighting how the Epistemic Refutation Paradox builds upon and extends Descartes' famous insight. Descartes' cogito ergo sum gave us one data point of certainty: the self exists as a thinking thing. ERP, in contrast, gives us a structural certainty. Any thinking, doubting, or experiencing at all confirms the reality of experience, and thus an experiencer. Where the cogito was a single first-person declaration, I exist, ERP provides a more general principle: experience exists for anyone who tries to deny it in any circumstance. It's a broader net. It doesn't merely say I am, it says that in the very engagement of thought or debate, something real is happening, experience, which is an even more universal claim. By doing this, ERP moves us further along the path Descartes started. Descartes stopped with the certainty of self, and then had to do additional work, some of it quite controversial philosophically, to trust his perceptions of the world. ERP, however, reframes the starting point. It isn't just the existence of oneself that we can be sure of, but the existence of experience as a phenomenon. This shift might seem subtle, but it has advantages. It avoids any need to define what the self is, or to prove anything about God or the external world at the outset. It simply says, whatever else may be the case, there is an experiencing going on. From that, we immediately got consciousness as real without having to conclude exactly who or what that consciousness is. We also got to knowledge must come via experience without having to assume the content of any particular experience is true. In a way, ERP is more modest and thus more robust than the cogito. It does not claim, therefore, I am, which implies a certain entity. It claims, therefore, some conscious experience is undeniably real. This can serve as a foundation not just for one individual's knowledge, but for a shared epistemology. Everyone can plug themselves into the principle, since anyone who questions it is having an experience. In short, the Epistemic Refutation Paradox generalizes Descartes' insight and sidesteps the additional assumptions he needed. It sticks strictly to what cannot be doubted and uses only that to build upward. This makes it a cleaner and, arguably, a more powerful starting point for a theory of knowledge. With ERP, we don't have to invoke any benevolent deities or assume a rational order of the world up front. We lean only on the undeniability of experience and see what that lets us construct. We have already constructed the certainty of consciousness and the necessity of experience for knowledge. Now we can press further to see how even more complex concepts might be grounded on this base. One such concept is will, our sense of making choices and having agency. Is our will as inescapable as our consciousness? And if so, what does that mean for the age-old problem of free will versus determinism? Reconciling will with determinism. One of the profound implications of acknowledging the primacy of experience is how it forces us to reevaluate the nature of free will. We have established that consciousness is real because experience is real. Consciousness, among other things, includes the experience of volition, the sense that we make choices, that we have a will. If experience is undeniable, then the experience of making a choice is also undeniable. In other words, will, at least in the subjective sense of I intend, I choose, I desire, is something real that we experience directly. Many people throughout history have argued about whether free will exists or whether everything is determined by prior causes. The ERP framework allows us to clarify this debate. It distinguishes between the reality of will as an experience and the freedom of will as an independent force. First, let's affirm the reality of will. We all feel that we make choices, we deliberate, we weigh options, and we decide. That feeling of deliberation is an experience, and as such it cannot just be brushed aside as non-existent. Some extremely strict deterministic philosophies have gone so far as to call free will an illusion. implying that our sense of choosing is like a trick the brain plays, and that in truth we're just automatons. But labeling it an illusion doesn't erase the phenomenon. Even if, say, our brain has already unconsciously decided something a split second before we become aware of our choice, we still experience the conscious intention and effort of choosing. That experience is a fact of our inner life. So in the spirit of ERP, we say, the experience of will is undeniably real to the conscious agent. However, recognizing that will exists in the experiential sense is not the same as claiming that will is somehow independent of causality. This is where we must carefully distinguish will from the traditional notion of free will. The classical idea of free will, particularly libertarian free will, implies that our will is uncaused, that it stands outside the chain of physical events, able to initiate actions purely on its own. ERP does not grant that kind of free will. Instead, it suggests a reconciliation. Will is real, but will is also determined. How can both be true? Consider that every thought, every desire, every intention you have comes from somewhere. It has inputs, your genetics, your upbringing, your past experiences, the current stimuli around you, the state of your neurons at that moment, all of which shape what you decide. Your conscious decision-making process doesn't float above this causal stream. It is part of the causal stream. When you make a choice, you are not violating physics or magically creating a new chain of events from nothing. You are enacting one possible path that was made available by all the prior conditions leading up to that moment. If we rewound the universe to the exact same prior conditions, your decision would unfold the same way every time, because the same you, with the same motivations and thoughts, would be making it. This might sound like it relegates will to a mere illusion, but it doesn't, because the key is that you are part of the causal chain. We tend to imagine determinism as something external that forces us to act a certain way, but in reality, determinism includes our internal deliberations as one of its processes. You, as a conscious being, are composed of a myriad of deterministic processes, chemical, electrical, etc., that give rise to your thoughts and choices. Those internal processes are somewhat isolated from external processes. Your brain is inside your skull, not directly controlled by the environment moment to moment, which is why it feels like your decisions are yours alone. The truth is, they are yours, they're happening inside your mind, but yours doesn't mean free from causation. It means originating from the unique configuration of your brain and history. In this sense, your will is autonomous. It operates from within you and not someone else, but not independent of causality. It operates according to the laws of nature and the state of the world. Think of the deterministic universe as an enormous, complex wave of events unfolding. Within that ocean of causality, each of us is like a smaller wave or current. The wave that is you rises and moves under the influence of deeper waters, but it also has its own coherent form. When your internal wave decides to turn left or right, it's not separate from the ocean. It's just a component of the ocean taking a particular shape. It feels free because it's not externally coerced. In that moment, the causes of its motion are mostly internal. But if we zoomed out, we'd see that both the internal and external factors are part of one continuous deterministic fabric. No one has ever demonstrated a choice that was completely free of any prior cause. Such a thing would be a random, causeless event, which ironically wouldn't be under your control either. So either our choices are caused, in which case they are determined by something, or they are random, in which case they are not willed by us in any meaningful sense. The notion of a will that is completely free in a metaphysical sense turns out to be incoherent, a kind of logical impossibility. What ERP contributes here is the insistence that while our will may not be free from causation, it is still a real phenomenon that must be accounted for in any complete picture of reality. We do experience making choices, and that is a data point as real as any scientific observation. Any worldview that writes off our sense of decision-making as pure illusion is essentially denying a chunk of experienced reality. And remember, denying the reality of an experience is a self-defeating move. Instead, we integrate will into the deterministic framework. We acknowledge that I choose is a true expression of what happens. It's just that why you chose can be explained by your prior mental state and inputs. Thus, will exists as an experience and as a proximal cause of actions. But it operates within a network of antecedent causes. By embracing this, we avoid two extremes. On one hand, we reject the naive idea of libertarian free will that imagines choices popping into existence ex nihilo from nothing. On the other hand, we reject an overly simplistic hard determinism that dismisses our inner life as irrelevant. In the ERP-informed view, your inner experiences are part of the causal chain. In fact, they are the crucial part that directly precedes many of your actions. So, when you decide to take a sip of coffee, it's true both that this decision was caused by your thirst, by your love of coffee, by your brain chemistry, etc., and that your conscious will was the immediate cause of the action. You lifted the cup because you wanted to. There is no contradiction here. Will is not some ghostly power. It is an emergent property of your brain's complex deterministic operation. It is free in the sense that nothing external was forcing the decision in that instant. It came from you, but it's not free from the influences that made you who you are. In a poetic sense, one might say determinism itself is the hidden hand guiding all our choices, the modern, naturalistic equivalent of Descartes' demon, not deceiving us about reality, but rather ensuring that every event, including every thought and choice, has a cause. We are enchanted by this deterministic order to feel as though we are independent agents, much as Descartes' demon would enchant a person to believe they're false. Reality, however, unlike the evil demon, determinism is not malevolent, it's simply the neutral unfolding of cause and effect. And crucially, understanding this does not make the experience of choosing any less real or significant. We are the conscious witnesses to our will's operation. We are parts of the universe that not only follow laws, but also experience following them. And in doing so, we attribute personal meaning to those actions. It's a humbling and illuminating realization. We are not above the cosmos, or outside of nature, we are completely of it. We are made of the same atoms and governed by the same forces as the stars, the rocks, and the oceans. Yet, out of that vast deterministic dance has emerged something extraordinary. Beings that have awareness, that reflect, that plan and choose. Consciousness and will are among the most spectacular results of the cosmic order, not exceptions to it. ERP allows us to see that we don't need to be exceptions to have worth or reality. Our will does not have to be uncaused to matter. Its importance lies in what it is our personal, felt locus of decision-making, rather than some mystical freedom it might possess. By integrating will into the deterministic framework, we end up with a coherent picture. Will is real because we experience it, and will is determined because it arises from and operates within a chain of causes. In this way, the concept of will is fully reconciled with the rest of our knowledge about the world, and we eliminate the false dichotomy. That says it must be either absolutely free or not exist at all. In conclusion, the epistemic refutation paradox has allowed us to secure a bedrock truth and build upward to a robust philosophical outlook. We started by finding certainty in the one place the skeptic could not shake, our own immediate experience. From that foundation, experience is real. We established the reality of consciousness, the primacy of experience in all knowledge, and even found a way to acknowledge will as genuine while harmonizing it with determinism. In doing so, what initially looked like a prison of subjectivity, Tripp's prison, has become the cornerstone of a new, unshakable framework for understanding reality. We have transformed our confinement within experience into a powerful principle, one that turns back every radical doubt and allows us to move forward, building knowledge on the one thing we can never doubt. Experience is the genesis of everything we know and are. By recognizing this, we have disarmed radical skepticism and shown that our inability to escape subjective experience is not a curse, but rather the very thing that gives us a foothold in reality. Everything that we can claim to know, we know through this window. And now we know beyond doubt that the window itself is real. The illusion of nothingness. You defined it. Defined what? Then it's something. One of the oldest philosophical riddles asks, why is there something rather than nothing? This question assumes that nothingness is a legitimate possibility.
All right, y'all, that was the Epistemic Refutation Paradox. As you heard, the illusion of nothing is the next chapter. ERP is our foundation, and everything builds off of that. And stay along for the ride. I'll be uploading those as soon as I can. Appreciate y'all.